Hello, I'm Dr. Franklin Solers. I'd like to welcome you to Transformation and Transcendence Roundtable podcast. We're going to discuss things spiritual, psychological, mystical. We're going to combine psychotherapy and psychological concepts since have all been trained as therapists, but all walk a spiritual path. We're going to combine all these elements and help with inspiration and guidance and coaching and support for each of you's spiritual growth. That's the intention. So we'll rely on case material. We'll rely on ancient wisdom as well as psychological awareness, depth psychology, Jungian psychology, Bionian psychology, different kinds of depth psychology that can be of help to you. So thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the journey, and we hope to be of service to you and help you in your growth. That's our mission. So thank you, and here we go. So hello, welcome to Transformation and Transcendence Roundtable podcast. Today we have Ben Bennett Carpenter, life coach, and Fareed Alazaba, a life coach and psychotherapist, and Joshua Morrow. I guess you should each say something so people get tuned into your voice. I was too quick. Huh? Joshua Morrow, who's a life coach and therapist.
Hello.
So say hi. They can't see some people can't see your hands.
Ben
you
here.
want to say that, Ben? Okay. Fareed?
Hi, everyone. It's Fareed.
Okay. All right. So just a little housekeeping, you might say. If you're on YouTube, please like and share. I think you can get there through Transformation and Transcendence Roundtable podcast. If you are interested in having life coaching services from any of these gentlemen and Leah Dickinson as well, you can get us through connect@franklinsolers.com or through 248-705-3798. And you can find this on, I think, all your podcast sites like Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, etc. So we're reachable that way. Anything else we should say there, Mystique?
No, available on iTunes, Spotify, Google, pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. So.
Okay. Mystique is our Cracker Jack producer. She's also an author, an editor, novelist. She wears many hats, but she's deigned to help us with producing the show, which we're very grateful for. So she may chime in occasionally here and there. Any other easy way to reach us for coaching or anything like that, Mystique?
You can go to any of your social media, Instagram, Facebook, or your website. There's a contact link, and in Instagram and Facebook, the link to your website, the podcast, and the YouTube channel are all in the bio.
Would that be Dr. Franklin Solers?
Yep, drfranklinsolers.com, or you can type in Transformation and Transcendence Life Coaching in Google. There's a page there. Transformation and Transcendence Roundtable on Instagram and Facebook.
Okay. There was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. There we have a book out. Actually, all three participants, Ben, Fareed, and Joshua, are contributors to the book, and Mystique was the editor of the book. It's called Food for Thought, Psyche, Spirit, and Soul: Stories, Poems, and Sayings to Uplift and Create Emotional and Spiritual Growth. So that is on it's on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble's. Food for Thought, Psyche, Spirit, and Soul. I'm the primary author, so if you put in my name, that'll come up there too. Yeah. Although there's a lot of contributing authors with stories and poems. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. We get into the content of the podcast. Spiritual transformation involves transcending duality. That's maybe a fancy word, but the dualistic plane is the plane we exist on as human beings, with conflict, turmoil, kind of battles interpsychic conflict as well. And self-realization and self-fulfillment is really, among other things, this doesn't totally define spiritual and mystical growth, but among other things, is transcending duality to the unity of consciousness. And among things we do then is we find these dualistic conflicts and begin to focus on them and resolve them. Now, so this particular conflict is called the fear of frustration versus the, fulfillment, right? That kind of thing. And this came from Eva Paraka's lectures, but the Buddha could have written this, really. And the idea is that frustration, we tense up against, we fear it. It causes a contraction in our body, kind of automatically. This is a common human predicament. And like the Buddha would say, that pain is part of life, and life is hard. And part of pain and life being hard is this element of frustration. So the point is, if you feel like you must have this and you have to avoid that, you have to, otherwise you can't be happy, you can't be okay. That creates a state of fear in us psychically, not only emotionally, but physically. The body tenses, the chakras tense. We have chakras, we haven't reviewed that, but we have a number of chakras. But if they close and your body tenses up, you walk around with this state of pain and tension and frustration that you kind of carry with you, rather than the idea of transforming it or passing through frustration, is that you accept it as it is, and you don't fear it, and you don't have to take it as this is dangerous and destructive. It doesn't have to be, because nothing comes from the outside that really we haven't in some way been part of and called. Even the dark, painful things, there's some element in us that is aligned with that we need to experience as teachers. Troubles happen in life, frustrations happen in life, again, as signposts for us to work on. But more than that, just the idea that when you tense up and you can't handle pain and you feel like it's a disaster and you get all undone by it, you're closing up your sense of peace. You're closing it down. You're not aligning with the life force. You're pinching it off. You're deadening yourself. And so you miss, this happens in trauma too, but frustration is maybe a micro trauma, right? When you close it all off, you lose track of creative possibilities. And you also lose your peace, right? And if you can go through the day and deal with frustration with equanimity, which is like accepting things as they are, not like resigning yourself again to them, but that you deal with them and you learn what you need to learn, and you have a peace about yourself, even with difficulties. You develop resilience. You develop an ability to, to handle life. Because here's the thing, if you want this sort of spiritual growth, self-realization, peace in life, you're not going to get it by expecting that life never brings you problems. It ain't going to happen. How it happens is by dealing with life on life's terms, and not getting undone, and not being reactive, and not getting intentioned fear cycles where you blame life and you hold on to hostility and angry dependence. This person has to change for me to be happy. That thing has to be different for me to be happy. That's all not true. You can be happy right now, even in difficulties, or relatively happy as you go through the pain. And until you get to happy, you can at least have a sense of peace, have a sense of, you can handle things. So you develop inner strength, and coping. So this is what I wanted to say, among other things. And there's 3 levels of you might say, ability to handle frustration. On the complete dualistic level, frustration is a disaster. It's terrible. Can't stand it. It means, like the death of me, right? That kind of thing. So all the tension and all the woes and all the amplification of feelings in hopes that something or someone will come along and fix things instead of you fixing or handling things yourself. That's the least mature level. The second level, which is when you begin to accept life on life's terms and accept frustration as part of life without being undone with a sense of peace, that's how you begin to change. That's how you begin to change and transform. Yeah. And that's a lifelong process, because you'll do it sometimes, and other times we're not able to do it. We fall down. We're humans. So, but if you can look for your frustrations and try to face them in this way, you begin to transform from the dualistic, to the unitive state. The third is when this begins to happen, and when frustration comes, you realize, you breathe into it, and you realize it's opportunity. It's pains are gains, and in some ways, not that you go try to find pain, but when it happens, when it comes to you naturally, there's something for you. And as you breathe into it and breathe through it and deal with it, you might even say grieve it for the moment, and then the uplifting part comes, that you feel like, okay, I have things to learn, I can manage, I'm resilient, I'm good at coping, and creative possibilities happen, and joy begins to happen, because you're not stuck in this tension fear cycle, and your life force flows, and your creativity flows, and your joy even continues to flow, or your happiness continues to flow in spite of frustration. So that's my lesson for the day, or my pitch today. I'd like to hear what everybody thinks. We also have some questions, but I think we're going to put them off because I forgot about the questions. Maybe we'll do them next week. They're really good questions from last week, but let's start here. So let's start.
So when you were describing, Dr. Sollers, the physical manifestations of the frustration and this kind of self-limiting maneuver that we do, the word that came to my mind was clinching. And I think that word really fits, because clinching is something that we do when we're in pain, but also when we're in fear. We clinch when we feel that a certain body part is in pain, or if we feel a painful emotion, but we also clinch in anticipation of a painful emotion. That is to say, in fear of a painful emotion. And then as far as frustration goes, it made me think of this idea that ideally frustration should just be a dance partner in life. You can't really get rid of it, but you work with it in this kind of artful way, in a kind of skillful way. And, as you said, you get something out of it. If you don't shut the door to it and you kind of collaborate with it and work through it in this kind of way that I'm thinking of dancing with it, I feel that, as you said, you can accomplish things in life and lead a more fulfilling life. One of the questions I had was, how can we convince people to do less of that clinching, to treat frustration as a dance partner? Because, of course, we're talking about it now, but I'd like to know, what are some ways that we can directly help people to achieve that?
Okay, well, I can begin to answer that, but let's hear if Joshua and Ben want to answer, or they have a different point of view. And certainly we can cycle back to that. How do we get people to do that? Yeah, it's a good one.
Well, I could jump in with, I appreciate that point about life being difficult. That's, I think about my old mentor, Mel Shaw, once told me, it's like, hey, you know that book, I'm going to forget the name of it now, The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. He said, you only need to read the first sentence, which is, life is difficult. And I think about, there's so many things we can say about life. Life is wonderful. We can go through a bunch of things, but that point about life being difficult is just massive. And just to be able to accept that is something that I have to come back to again and again, just to adjust my expectations. But one thing I was wondering about is just maybe a point of clarification for people who might be in abusive situations or in unjust situations. Because sometimes if there's a big power difference, and someone says, well, just kind of accept your situation, it's really like up to you. Um, what would there be a point of? I'm just wondering about maybe Dr. Sellers clarifying that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good point. A very good point. So to apply this transformation and transcendence of frustration by accepting frustration psychically and relaxing, and it really is not antithetical, or it doesn't work against this idea that you take care of yourself. The fact that you can relax into something and start to experience, and you don't shut down and cringe and clinch. It leaves you with more abilities, more to creatively deal with the problem. It doesn't mean the problem goes away immediately, but you might have, you might still stay in touch with your creative, poetic abilities to understand things more intuitively, find different opportunities. And it doesn't mean you should accept abuse without taking care of yourself, doing the best you can, using your ego to sort things out, to be assertive when you need to be assertive, to leave the field, leave the relationship if you need to, or leave temporarily, to negotiate, to all these kinds of things, to get help. These faculties still stay intact, and it doesn't obviate them, it doesn't eliminate them. So it's not a contradiction. Self-care can still be involved, but you don't amplify it, and you don't make it worse, and you don't cringe and close down, which really truncates your faculties to adapt and to deal with things, and this has been noted as part of the traumatic response. Consciousness constricts in trauma, and available options constrict because the person gets in a panic state, and they lose track of abilities and options. Just think of somebody who's also, like, I think I've used this example before, underwater, and your air goes out. You panic. That's the worst thing, right? If you panic, because then you lose your ability to think of options and find a way out, to find a way to manage as best you can. So the point there is that if you do this, it actually helps you deal with the world, as well as keep your flow going, keep your sense of presence going, keep your sense of enjoyment of, or at least positive experience and felt sense of being okay, if it's less than joy, through it all. Yeah, that you can manage in better ways. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, I think of some, for myself, immediate situations I've been in where I felt that I definitely had to fight back in some way, push back, fight back. I had to engage in conflict, and I had to engage in conflict because I was being threatened in some way. But I also I would say that, but also I hear in more as you elaborate, I started to get a little bit of a martial arts sort of image of even in a conflictual situation, or even in a like a fighting situation, there can be a real strong argument and idea of accepting what's happening there, in the sense of knowing exactly what's going on and being able to go with a certain sort of flow that may encompass the conflict. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, the idea of using the energy for your benefit, the negative energy, like in jujitsu, they attack you, you use it, their momentum to throw them, right? You see that kind of thing, right? Rather than, anyway, that can fit the whole idea. And it's not that we don't have conflicts, it's just this is a better way to handle them. And as we move through life and apply these principles more, this principle of transformation, of frustration, of the duality, of pleasure versus frustration, that things get easier, and you also, with a peaceful state of equanimity, rather than a tense, forcing, demanding, angry, dependent, combative kind of point of view. And I don't mean to take care of yourself, but as a way to make life change so that people do what you want so you can be happy. That is counterproductive. And again, it doesn't mean that there aren't moments when you need to defend yourself. But a lot of times when you have this fear tension cycle, it isn't, you're just taking care of yourself. You're actually combating other people, making them, you're forcing current, making them want to change, have to change for you to feel okay, that kind of thing. So
one other passing thought here is that image you gave, Fareed, of clinching. And I guess one place I go with that is like sometimes I think sometimes I do need to clinch, but then the mistake might be made if that's a state that I stay in over time, thinking, I mean, there's certain conflictual situations or extreme situations where we do need to clinch up and we do need to push back or what have you. But maybe the mistake, a lot of us, I'll just speak for myself, a mistake that I might make is then falling into that as a default mode for like lots of situations, as opposed to just saying, okay, that was appropriate in an extreme situation for self-defense or what have you, but now it doesn't apply probably 99% of the rest of the time. So I can just let this go and just unclench.
Well, I'll say, Ben, I think the question you raised earlier is an important one because really, I think you're introducing this distinction between acceptance as allowing into awareness and acceptance as putting up with. So to stay with the example of frustration, I think Dr. Stollers is right. There are cases where there is an underlying sense of frustration, but because your field of consciousness is so narrow and constrained in the ways that can sometimes result from trauma, you're not able to bring that frustration into awareness to bear on your decision making and then go forward and make a decision with the full data of your felt bodily sense. That, I think, is the way that we use the term acceptance in a positive way. But you're absolutely right. Once the frustration has been accepted into my field of consciousness, so to speak, if I then say, well, the merits of acceptance dictate that I must just put up with this frustration, then yes, for example, if there's an exploitative relationship at work, then it would be negative for me to, using this term acceptance, then just put up with the frustration. So I think that's a distinction that you have introduced, Ben, by raising that question. So I thank you for that. This idea of, are you accepting it by bringing it into your awareness and using it as data to see how to move forward? Or are you accepting it in terms of you're putting up with it, in which case, as you rightly say, maybe you shouldn't put up with it, maybe you should fight back.
yes, and pushing back and clinching are not the same thing, at least as we're trying to use it here. Shutting down, contracting, being tense about life events that come your way is different than staying open and using your faculties to manage, to be assertive, to even have to fight if you have to physically, which is rare these days. But now, not out of the question. But you can be open to your experience, and you can not get all tense and shut down your consciousness and block your body flow, and be available to take care of life, to take care of what comes your way. They're not a conflict or contradiction. And I would say, just if you look at people that do well in situations, there seem to be the ones who I think can approach conflict that way, even physical conflict. They have this sense of like confidence and not to say if a lion's chasing you, you better run. Don't get me wrong. That's a little different than what we're talking about. That you might stay open to the flow and run your ass off, okay? But we're not talking about all that kind of stuff all the time. That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah, but we're talking more about common frustrations where you think life has to be different. I can't, if my person doesn't do this for me, if my wife doesn't do this for me, if my job promotion doesn't come, if I have another difficulty come, for example, I'll just give you.
Why aren't the dishes doing themselves?
Yeah, things like that. That's right. You see, common entitlement kinds of things, right? That, rather than understanding, sometimes, you have to, for example, if you want the dishes to do themselves, or you want the money to flow into your household, but you don't really want to put in the time and the energy to work because that's too frustrating, you're not going to get very far, right? You're trying to push the river. Your entitlement occludes, the reality that you have to face. And if you can relax and start to look at your life and say, well, I mean, this is a crass example, but if I really want to have money flow into my household, I better go to work. And even if it's not the, $50 an hour job, maybe it's a $20 an hour, an $18 an hour job. I better do it because that's a step, at least on the ladder of self-care. But to be frustrated that, sometimes people say, to be mad at the rain for being wet, that's a problem, right? You're just gonna beat your head against the wall for nothing, and nothing can be accomplished because the rain's gonna always be wet, right?
So
As far as I know. Somebody want to say something?
yeah. There's so many things I guess I want to bring up from this with frustration. Like the shoulding yourself. Like what I see with clients is that like when they're saying in their mind, it should be this way, it should be that way. What I'm starting to see is that, okay, these people have this expectation that the world is this thing, but the reality is the world is over here. And so that gap between they think it should be, and that there's this entitlement piece with that where it's like, well, it should be this way because I want it that way. And then that leads to frustration. And it's sort of, for me, it's like all of our emotions have a positive function. They're trying to do something positively. It's just when but they don't always as they're coming out. And so like, for me, Fareed, with what you said, I see that sometimes emotion less as information and more as like fuel. It's like frustration is the fuel that you put in the engine to get you going down a certain path to do things. And to sort of like, if I'm frustrated that this thing is this way, well, that's going to push me towards changing that to be a different way, the way that I kind of want it to be. Sometimes that's not appropriate to do, though. Sometimes it's not appropriate for me to take my frustration and use it in this way. Maybe I need to not use it. Maybe I need to use it in this direction or that direction. But oh my gosh, I wrote so much down. Like one of the things that came up for me was with this frustration, like I'm thinking practically, like what are the practical things we can do in sharing this stuff? And in my mind, one of the things that comes up is like learned helplessness. Like, how does that play into this? Like, because like I've certain parts of my life where it's just such learned helplessness, especially in the social world. And so it's just like, I can be frustrated about it. I can have all these emotions about it, but in the end, I always end with this feeling of just helplessness. I can't do anything about it. Everything I've ever done my whole life has not worked out in this way. And so I've had all these emotions before, nothing's changed. And so it's a weird space to be in. And so what does frustration even do in that space for me, or for other people that are experiencing a similar thing?
Well, part of the idea with learned helplessness, and I forgot who was was that Meichenbaum, or who was that?
It was Seligman.
Seligman, right? He also talked about inoculation from learned helplessness, which is really keeping your avenues open and keeping the creative possibilities open. I mean, and not throwing in the towel, right? Now, it doesn't mean you force the old way, but maybe you meditate, maybe you relax and say, I've done all this. What else do I need to do? Or align with your higher self and or the poetic in you, the creative in you, universal consciousness, and ask for answers, right? And wait in a rhythm with them. Sometimes they don't jump out and say, this is the answer. Although I wouldn't say it never happens, right? Sometimes in a dream, this is the answer. I had in the dream, there was somebody holding up a placard and telling telling me the answer, so I wouldn't miss it. I didn't have to interpret symbolism too much in that dream. It was right there in the sign. Right? So, but anyway, so yeah, so that it is even applies to learned helplessness. Otherwise, if you shut down, you're going to, and if you rail against the frustration and tension, and you say that's it, and that's really a passive, angry response directed at yourself in life that goes inverted, right? So you want to wait, you want to try, and then wait for answers that may come from different places, and different solutions may appear, right? But you don't want to just passively resign. Here's another thing about this. There are some people who, and maybe we do this alternately, they have this sort of flaccid response to life, like, things are not going their way. So they kind of drop out. They don't try very hard. They just do what they have to do. Then they get upset that they don't have more and life is boring and stuff. Part of that response is the fact that they, instead of understanding that they're frustrated, they even repress that. They just go. They just drop out, and they become bored, and they become restless, and they become unhappy. And it's like a ubiquitous feeling. And we've talked about this. It's kind of this idea, we've talked about it in different angles, this idea that life lacks meaning, lacks zest. This is a flaccid kind of inverted response to frustration when people, they drop out of it, they repress it so much, they don't even know quite what they're doing. So part of the answer, going back to Fareed saying, well, what do we do? How do we help clients understand this? Is to help them see and feel their frustrations, to help them, through our reflection, our interpretation, our clarification, is to help them see, where they're frustrated, and then what they're longing for, and what the tension is, and how they deal with it. And maybe they drop out, or maybe they spitefully go on a certain path, or maybe they just close off. So they do this so much, they're always tense and anxious all day long. There's a remedy for that, in a large part, just by not doing that and not having to force life. Yeah. So go ahead, Ben.
This discussion too has me thinking of, it might sound a little odd, it could be misinterpreted, but it got me thinking of, in terms of the helplessness or a feeling of powerlessness. I mean, one of my thoughts on that is, well, number one, it's one of the feelings that many of us humans want the least. I mean, it can be a terrible, terrible feeling of being helpless or powerless. I mean, it's got to be one of the worst that there is. And then, meanwhile, and this is maybe the strange part, I guess, is, I mean, I sort of look at it from a certain angle or certain scale. There's a certain factualness to that. I mean, it just, if that I say for myself that I am powerless. So, I mean, if I look at sort of like a cosmic perspective, I mean, I am just one like pebble in a vast ocean. If I'm, in terms of just looking at the scale of things, I'm only one person among 8 billion other people. I'm only one individual among, I don't even know how many species, there are, individual beings there are. And then we go out to that. I mean, so in this vast, vast scale, and we could also go that's going outwardly, but we could go like more microscopically as well. And just the volume of things, and the immense powers that are out there in that scale. If I contemplate that, I mean, to some extent, you could still say, but you still have a little bit of power, but the relative power is so minuscule that there is some element of factualness that I actually am powerless. And so I think that can be something that none of us want to feel, but at the same time, it can also be like, well, this actually might reflect at least one aspect of reality, which then can either be, I think, very hard to accept, or sometimes it's a big relief. Like, oh, my feeling of powerlessness actually reflects reality, at least in a certain way. And then if I fast forward real quick, then my next thing would be, yes, but I am here. I am one individual, and there are actual things I can do, even in this vast scope of things. So I have kind of this baseline of a feeling of powerlessness, which probably also reflects some reality, but then also, wait, no, but I'm still here and I do have these powers, these little powers. And then it starts to feel empowering again. I start to build back up again, like, oh, okay, I can do things. There are things I can do. And I start to feel all the strength coming back and something like that. But that's just like a rapid fire maybe journey for me on the, the powerlessness, helplessness thing.
Well, we're not omnipotent, and there's the serenity prayer. Lord, help us, change the things we can, accept the things we can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. So, yes, but on a micro level, if you want to transcend this fear, tension, pain cycle, where things become more peaceful, less frightening, more sort of like doable in life, like more manageable, and life moves in the direction of peace, a peaceful, resilient response to life, which moves us in the direction of happiness and out of fear and into peace. And this can be helpful, but we can't on the macro levels, it's hard to really picture how we can affect that. Although I do think macro level changes begin on the micro level, right? You got millions of people who start to approach life differently. The noosphere, or the consciousness of the planet, begins to change as well too. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that Josh brought up this idea of shoulds, because the way that I understand shoulds they are blocks in the ongoing stream of our felt sense. I think at any given time, moment to moment, we have this stream of our conscious experience, of our affective experience. And in an ideal situation, we open all the channels, so to speak, and we allow it to flow through us. And we act in a very spontaneous way on the basis of this moment to moment stream of experience. As soon as we say the word should, we impose something like a value judgment, and we block off one of those streams. We pinch the stream, and I think from there we run into problems. To use an example that I think might illustrate this, if we're at work and a superior says something to us that we perceive as a slight, we may feel frustrated in that moment, but we may have an idea that, well, one ought not to be frustrated with a superior. That would be insubordination or disrespect. The moment that we pinch off that degree of frustration towards them, I think then we run into problems. As you said, Dr. Sollers, there might even be physical correlates of that pinching off or clenching. What we need to be helped to do is to open our range of consciousness, and in a very frank way, have someone explain to us, yeah, it sucked when he said that, and it made you frustrated. Let's bring that frustration into the room. Let's open up your degree of consciousness. Let's open that channel and accept it insofar as you're becoming aware of it. From there, Ben's distinction about acceptance as awareness versus acceptance as putting up with becomes important, because once you've opened that stream and allowed yourself to be in contact with the frustration you have towards your superior at work, that's when you can say, okay, what do I do about it now? And I like, Josh, your metaphor of the fuel, because then you take the fuel and you see where you're going to apply it. For example, is this a slight that was objectively questionable and maybe I should go to HR, maybe I should complain about it in some way? Or is it a slight that I think is an inevitable part of being in the position I am, in which case my frustration would not go into lodging a complaint at HR, but rather to just moving up the hierarchy at work and doing things that will enable me one day to be in his position, to where I won't have to suffer such slights that happened as a virtue of the discrepancy in our positions. So there's something very subtle going on here where, again, the acceptance is not acceptance of the frustration per se. You do something about the frustration, But I think the first thing you have to do is open up your awareness enough to where you're not pinching that stream of awareness. You're just letting yourself feel and then act in a spontaneous way that reflects the reality of your lived experience.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Said very well. Yeah.
Can I add to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I see when that stream gets pinched, that's when that feeling then descends into the unconscious mind. And that's where people start to get really passive aggressive because they don't have that channel open. They can't assert, they can't express, they can't use that fuel, but it doesn't go away. It stays internally, and then it starts to outlet unconsciously in all these ways that are problematic at times, especially for the people who they're doing that are doing it, because they don't even realize that frustration is still being outletted, and then that can get other people can retaliate against that, and then they don't know why, and then that increases it, and they get vicious cycles going.
Exactly. Very good. Very good too. That's exactly right. It creates more problems when you don't accept it, when you repress it, versus you accept it with a sense of equanimity and peace as best you can, and learn from it. And maybe with the adaptivity that we have and resilience that we have, like Fareed's saying, find better answers, find better ways, because we're not pinching it off, cringing away from it, that kind of thing. Yeah. We're aware, and we're breathing into it, and then life expands rather than contracts and pinches. Yeah. Excellent way to kind of finish. Go ahead, Fareed. You want to say something?
One last thing, because I can't resist, Ben, you brought up this idea of hopelessness, helplessness, actually as a spiritual aspect. And I'm so glad you said that, because that was exactly what I thought when Josh brought up this idea of helplessness. And I think really that's the nature of spiritual practice, is you take these bare facts of existence that would otherwise cause you distress, and you elevate them into the sublime. So in this case, yes, the very fact that we are puny humans that for the most part are determined by factors way outside of our control, that we're thrown into most situations, that we really exert only a very small degree of control, becomes not something to despair about, but something to be in awe about. Because of course, in most spiritual traditions, and I'll speak now in the Muslim tradition, you say, well, that's a sign of God's majesty. That's a sign of the creation, of the design of reality itself. This is not a flaw, this is a feature of the design of reality. And again, what would otherwise evoke despair, and maybe does in a purely secular setting. If you don't have a link to the transcendence, you can only despair about your helplessness in the world. But the spiritual offers you a hand and says, well, let's take this and actually have you be in awe of it, and have you recognize that there's some kind of a majesty behind it, or some kind of a positive spiritual truth that you can deduce from it. So I'm very glad you brought that up, Ben, and I think you said it better than I could, this idea of when you introduce the spiritual aspect, what at first looks like something to despair about actually becomes a transcendent truth.
And mine's a secular version of all that, but that's absolutely beautifully put, Fareed.
And the
Beautifully
awe,
put.
yeah, it is. It's great. And the awe and wonder is really that's a part of the transcendent or the spiritual life. Is that we do have this awe and wonder, and it's not just awe and wonder doesn't have to be despair, right? It's a very different way of looking at and feeling into life. So that's really good, really good. Okay, so thanks everybody. So don't forget, if you're on YouTube, to like and subscribe. You can find us on all the podcasts. We'll answer some questions next week. Again, very rich, and thank you everybody, all the panel people, and Mystique. Thanks. You want to say anything to Mystique? You want to add in quickly, or?
No, I think I'm good. I was just enjoying listening this time around. So
Okay, thanks.
thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, have a great week.
Have a good week.
See ya.
Okay.
So thank you very much for being part of our Transformation and Transcendence Roundtable podcast. We'll be having this podcast every Thursday at 12 noon, but then it will be uploaded where you could be able to find it on any podcast platform that you have, Apple, Spotify, etc. And it should be on, will be on YouTube as well. So thanks for joining us, and we hope it's been helpful in your spiritual and emotional growth, and that you've gleaned a little bit of blessing and insight and inspiration for your growth as you go forward. May it blossom throughout your day. Okay, thanks again. See you next time.